Welcome back, everyone. So far we have looked at what caused World War I and how Germany could have won the war. Well, now let's think about what a German victory would have looked like. Unfortunately, this is more speculative than fact-based. It is one thing to examine how one event or course of action could change the outcome, but it is quite another thing to predict what that outcome would look like. It is a chronic problem for anyone studying counterfactual history. However, I have several theories and scenarios for this. There are two main scenarios to look at based on what we discussed, mainly a German victory in 1914 and 1917. There would be a drastically big difference on the outcome depending on which one occurred. Let's start with a German victory in 1914. From what I can tell, a swift German victory probably would have been the best thing for Europe. Just hear me out. Had Germany knocked out France in 1914 and then taken out Russia with significant ease, millions of lives would have been spared. The old European order would have been preserved, instead of all the revolutions that occurred across Europe after the war. The strength and wealth of the European nations would have been maintained, instead of the Central Powers starving to death by Allied blockades, while the Allies became deep in debt to the US for borrowing a ridiculous amount of money to maintain the war effort. Granted, I'm not saying it was the best thing for the world. Europe would have certainly maintained its imperialism, even taking over China eventually. The United States would have remained a regional power instead of a world power, for the time being anyways. After defeating the Allies within a year, Germany would have probably become the master of continental Europe. In addition, Germany probably would have acquired more overseas colonies. The consequences of this could be incredibly far-reaching. For starters, German would definitely be more wide-spoken today. However, what exactly would a Germanized Europe look like? I have no idea. I would love to speculate, but it would be a pure guess. As a historian, I wouldn't be doing the topic justice if I just guessed. However, let's continue on with what I can say with relative certainty. Had Germany knocked France out of the war, they would have, of course, taken land from them, along with Belgium, for causing them so much trouble. There also would have been war reparations. However, in all honesty, I doubt it would have been severely harsh, especially compared to the Treaty of Versailles. There was no particular animosity towards the French by the Germans, unlike the other way around. France would have still maintained its sovereignty and empire. In all honesty, it would have been in much better shape in this timeline than in your timeline. Great Britain would have been left in even better shape. With the defeat of France, Great Britain would not have had a foothold in continental Europe. They most likely would have made peace with Germany fairly quickly, having no viable way to defeat them. However, Germany was in no position to impose any real demands on them. Great Britain was still protected by its dominant navy. Thus, at worst, Great Britain's pride would have been hurt, and there would probably be some relatively minor economic repercussions, but by and large, they would have been relatively unscathed. As for the Russians, this is where things get iffy. With France out of the war, Russia may have still had the false belief that they could carry on the war by themselves. It would have become apparent rather quickly, however, that they would lose. Whether or not they would surrender quickly or not is up for debate. The longer they waged war, however, the worse their prospects looked. After the humiliating defeat at the Russo-Japanese War, Russia was still licking its wounds in shame. Another defeat would not have been good for the morale of the people who were already upset with the Tsar. The Tsar would at minimum have to give up power to a parliament of sorts. Whether or not the Tsar would still be in power today is again up for debate. Had Russia hung into the war, determined to fight to the death, revolution would still have most certainly occurred. What type of government would be established in its place is anyone's guess, but it most likely wouldn't have been communist, at least the one we know. Anyways, Russia would still lose Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, etc. On that note, Germany would have certainly annexed some territory from Russia. In addition, they would have probably created a Polish state, under their protection of course, as a sort of buffer between Germany and Russia. Moving on, you might be wondering about Germany's allies. Well, this is where things still get iffy. Let's start with the Austrians. After defeating Serbia, probably with German assistance, it is hard to know exactly what they would have done. Most likely, however, they would have annexed Serbia. Unfortunately, they would be incredibly harsh on its people. Whether or not they would have committed genocidal acts against the population for all the trouble they caused is up for debate, but either way, they would certainly put the Serbs in their place in some fashion, whatever that means. In addition, since Austria and Russia were both trying to encroach on the Balkans, with the Russian defeat, Austria would have had free rein in the Balkans to do what they pleased. Also, they probably would have annexed small parts of Russia. However, the question then becomes, how long would the Austro-Hungarian Empire survive? As I stated before, Austria contained 11 nationalities. In an era of nationalism, it makes me think how long Austria could pacify its peoples, who desired independence. Annexing the Balkans would only add to that problem by adding more people who wanted to maintain their independence. Unfortunately for Austria, they seem to have had a very old-fashioned imperial mindset that was just out of date in the ever-changing world. Is it possible the Austro-Hungarian Empire could still exist? Sure, that is entirely possible. However, it would not exist in the same form as it did currently. The empire would eventually have to grant its minorities semi-autonomy or at least representation in some sort of parliament. Most likely, they would have adopted a proposal known as the United States of Greater Austria. It was a plan conceived in 1906 and was actually supported by none other than Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The plan was basically an attempt to federalize the empire to help resolve widespread ethnic and nationalist tensions. Basically, the plan called for redrawing the map of Austria to create semi-autonomous states, which would all be part of a larger Austrian confederation. This honestly seems like the most viable option if the Austrian Empire was to survive in some form to the present day. Whether or not it would have worked is up for debate, but I just love to speculate about it. On to the Ottomans. The Ottomans did not actually enter the war until October 29th of 1914. By then, France would have surrendered, and Great Britain probably would have made peace. The only other potential enemy would be Russia. Once Russia was defeated, the Ottomans would probably have been given some Russian territory. The Ottomans would still have preserved their empire. This would have dramatic consequences for the future. Many of the problems in the Middle East today were a direct result of European interference in former Ottoman territories. A German victory would mean the Ottoman Empire isn't dissolved, which means that the current Middle Eastern conflicts would not exist. As to how the Middle East would look today is anyone's guess. However, had the Ottoman Empire remained intact, it could actually be pretty wealthy and powerful today. At the time of the war, the Ottomans were a dying empire. However, with the skyrocketing demand for oil in modern society, the Ottomans could have turned their economic misfortunes around by tapping into the vast oil fields, thus becoming a wealthy and powerful empire again. However, had Germany won the war in 1917, things could be dramatically different. Granted, some things would still be similar, so I will just go over what would be different. So, after 3 years of war, millions of people dead, and nearly being starved to death, Germany would definitely want revenge, just like the Allies did in your timeline. First off, the Allies would pay dearly. The treaty imposed on Russia would still probably be the same as it was in your timeline, which was pretty harsh. A treaty of similar harshness would be imposed against the French and probably Belgians. Granted, Germany still wouldn't take much land from France in all honesty, but the French would pay severely in terms of war reparations. However, would it be as harsh as the Treaty of Versailles? I doubt it. In your timeline, the Treaty of Versailles blamed the entire war on Germany and stripped them of their ability to wage war. In this new timeline, I doubt Germany would blame France for the entire war. Also, Germany was the military powerhouse, not France, so I doubt Germany would be threatened by France's ability to wage war against them in the future. No offense, French people. That being said, France would still suffer greatly, maybe just not as bad as Germany did in the current timeline. On the other hand, Great Britain probably would have received the least punishment. Protected by their navy, Germany still couldn't really force them to do anything. Exactly what the stipulations of these treaties would be is unknown, but either way they would be severe. Just maybe not as severe as those imposed on Germany. As in your timeline, the great powers of Europe would be stripped of much of their wealth and power. Their overseas empires would suddenly become much more costly to maintain. The expansion of European overseas empires would cease, like in your timeline, thus sparing such nations as China. The conditions in Europe after the war would still be pretty similar as in your timeline. All the nations would be exhausted. Revolutions could possibly still break out all across Europe. The old world order would be severely damaged, if not destroyed. Many of the new ideas that emerged after World War I in your timeline would still rise in this new timeline. As for Germany's allies, their future would be less certain. After 3 years of death and destruction, it is unclear how long the Austrian and Ottoman empires could survive. Their survival was in doubt even if Germany won the war in 1914. After 3 years of devastating fighting, it seems the more appropriate question would not be if they could survive, but how long until they would collapse. Granted, they would have most certainly annexed Allied territories. Austria would acquire Italian territories, while the Ottomans acquire African territories held by Great Britain. However, these new territories and the people in them would only add to their problems. In all honesty, they might have survived a few years or even decades, but it seems more likely that they would still have collapsed at some point. Is it possible that I am wrong and they could have survived? Sure. If Austria were to survive, they would most certainly have to implement the United States of Greater Austria proposal, or something similar, if they wanted any remote chance of keeping it together. However, what would have happened if they collapsed? Well, Eastern Europe might look very similar to the way it does today. However, one important difference is that German Austria, in order to save face, might have unified with the German Empire, thus finally truly unifying the German people. I'm not sure if this would have actually happened, but it is a scenario I like to ponder over. As for the Ottomans, if they could keep ethnic and nationalistic tensions from various Muslim groups under control, they might have been able to survive long enough until the petroleum business kicked off, bringing a much-needed influx of wealth. Again, this is all speculation. We may never know what would have actually happened. Lastly, what would the future of Europe be? For starters, Europe would be on the long path to recovery, as it was in your timeline. Most notably, however, World War II would not have happened, at least the way we know it. The German Kaiser would still probably be in power, even if Parliament were given more control over the German government. Adolf Hitler would have never gained power for obvious reasons. As for the future of the other nations, it is less certain. What the provisional Russian government would have turned into, we may never know. Would a devastated and humiliated France turn to fascism and abandon democracy? It's entirely possible, though not very likely. How would the other revolutions across Europe turn out? That's anyone's guess. There's a lot we can't say. Who knows what figures would step in and guide Europe towards its uncertain future, for better or for worse? How would Germany handle being the master of continental Europe? Would a Cold War or World War II develop between an embittered Great Britain and Germany over global superiority? Or would the powers of Europe finally make permanent peace with each other, ensuring that World War I really would be the war to end all wars? Well, that pretty much sums up my first discussion. Now I would like to hear from you. What do you guys think? Are my scenarios possible? Did you feel there were any major chances for a German victory that I missed? Did I forget to mention anything of importance? Please leave your thoughts and comments below. If you have any ideas for another video, feel free to let me know. Special thanks to Dr. Wolf and Silver Quill for inspiring me to finally get this project off the ground. This is Team Shadow, signing off.